Representative Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Buttigieg, I've been driving an electric car for 10 years, and I've had solar panels for 15 years, and I'm really bullish on technology and the way it could help make our country energy independent or more energy independent. But I'm really alarmed at sort of the naivete of those who are promoting rapid adoption of these technologies with our existing infrastructure. President Biden signed a non-binding executive order stating that 50% of vehicles sold in the United States should be electric by 2030. Do you support that?
Yes.
And he also said that by 2035 that 100% of the federal government fleet should be electric. Do you support that?
Yes.
So which uses more electricity? We're talking about residential electricity here. A refrigerator when it's running or an electric car when it's charging in your garage?
I would expect a car.
Would you say it uses twice as much or 25 times as much?
I would think closer to 25 times as much. Yeah.
It's actually 50 at the instantaneous moment, but over the course of a year, if I take the numbers from the U.S. Department of Energy about the average household, how many vehicles they own and how far they drive, over the course of a year, an American household would use 25 times as much electricity for their electric car as they would for their refrigerator if they had 100% adoption. And the average family has 2 vehicles, and this would be if the average family had 2 electric vehicles. Do you think it would strain the grid if everybody plugged in 25 refrigerators in every household?
Well, if we didn't make any upgrades to the grid, sure. I mean, if we had yesterday's grid with tomorrow's cars, it's not going to work. It's one of the reasons why we believe that infrastructure includes electrical infrastructure and argued for that to be included, as it thankfully was in the bipartisan law.
Do you think by 2030, which is when Biden says 50% of cars sold should be electric, do you think the grid will be capable of handling electric cars?
It's going to need to be, and we're working with the Department of Energy every day. We've established a joint office of energy and transportation to map out some of the needs. Obviously, some of this gets outside of my lane, and we've been discussing with, for example, the truck stops that are looking at what their power needs would need to be at an interchange where today they're mainly filling up on gas in order to accommodate that. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of the scenario for this is also residential. But it's also worth pointing out that while a typical driver who adopts electric is using more electricity, at the end of the day, they're using less energy because of the efficiency benefits of getting that energy produced at utility scale.
The problem is we don't have the
fuels in your car.
capacity to produce that energy. You aptly use the word need. You could say want as well. There's needs and wants to make this fantasy work by 2030, but the reality is the capability is not going to be there. The average household uses 17% of their electricity for air conditioning. And that would mean the average household uses 1,870 kilowatt hours per year for air conditioning. If that average household plugged in electric cars, do you know how much more electricity they would use in comparison to the air conditioning that air conditions their whole house?
No, but again, I would emphasize it will
Let
be
me help
less
you. Let me help
energy
you with
overall.
that first before we go on, because the numbers are important. It would take 4 times as much electricity to charge the average household's cars as the average household uses on air conditioning. Do you think that could be? So if we reach the goal by 2030 that Biden has of 50% adoption instead of 100% adoption, that means the average household would use twice as much electricity charging one of their cars as they would use for all of the air conditioning that they use for the entire year. Do you think this could contribute to rolling blackouts and brownouts in areas of the country where air conditioning is basically considered essential?
Not if we prepare. Look, the fact that people who have electric vehicles are going to use more electricity can't be a reason to give up. The idea that America is inferior to the other countries that have figured this out just doesn't sit well with us in administration, and that's why we're investing in a better grid.
In the time that I have left, let me say, I'm not saying we shouldn't prepare. I told you at the beginning of this, I'm bullish on this technology, but the numbers and the rate of adoption has been developed using political science, not engineering. They're impractical, and if we blindly follow these goals that Biden has set out, it will cause pain and suffering for the middle class. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Johnson.
I yield to Congressman Mr. Neguse.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. 16 days. 16 days. That's how much time we have left until the government runs out of funding. 6 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, I stood here on the floor of the House with my colleagues as House Republicans gavelled the House out of session for a 45-day recess. Now, you may recall, Mr. Speaker, the priority that House Republicans were pursuing on that day as we gavelled out of session. I can assure you it was not to fund the government. It was instead a bill targeting the lesser prairie chicken and the long-eared bat. Literally. This came on the heels of a summer spent on Republican bills to protect gas stoves. 6 weeks later, we're back in Washington. Republicans have gavelled the Congress back into session. Here we are on the House floor yet again. And what are we spending our time doing? Perhaps a bill to fund the government? No. A bill to ensure that members of our armed forces are paid, that the operations of our government remain up and running? No. Instead, House Republicans choose to spend the time of this body debating a bill attacking electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, gas stoves, the long-eared bat, and the lesser prairie chicken. Those are the priorities of the House Republican caucus. 16 days away from a government shutdown. And this is how House Republicans choose to spend our time. The priorities that House Republicans are pursuing are grossly out of step with the priorities of the American people. You are in charge, Mr. Speaker. You could choose today to put bills on the floor to build safer communities, or lower costs, or grow the middle class. Instead, we're left with political games. Oh, that's right, and a baseless impeachment inquiry that the Speaker announced 48 hours ago. Maybe we can get back to the basic job of the U.S. House, of governing, of passing a budget. You know, Mr. Speaker, there's a good place to start. The Fiscal Responsibility Act that this body passed a mere 4 months ago set out negotiated spending levels. I don't know if the Speaker voted for it, but 149 of your colleagues did in the Republican caucus. The ranking member, my friend from Texas, he voted for it. And now, months later, the Republican caucus, the Speaker, they have abandoned, they have revoked, reneged on that deal. Why? Because the far-right members of their caucus have demanded it. And so here we are, 16 days away from a government shutdown that many members of the Republican conference seem fixated on creating. We had a Rules Committee hearing. The distinguished gentlewoman joined me just a few days ago, where one of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle was unabashed, who said, let's shut it down. And of course, for those Americans watching, they know that we've been here before. They've seen this movie. They have seen how it ends.
Yielding another for 30 seconds.
I thank the gentlewoman.
Gentleman from Colorado has yielded 30 seconds.
They know, Mr. Speaker, that if Republicans are in control of the House, there is one thing they can count on, and that is that Republicans will shut the government down, as they did in mid-1990s under Speaker Newt Gingrich, as they did in 2013 under Speaker Boehner, as they did in 2018 under Speaker Ryan. I implore my colleagues to get back to the basics of governing. Work with us in good faith. Honor the agreement that you all voted for 4 months ago. Let's fund the government, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I yield back.